let's go ahead and get started here. This is Best Practices Part 2, how to get buy-in from your team or how to train your team. Okay. All right, so first off here, my name is Blake Bailey. I am the team lead here for customer success at Process Street. So today we're going to be going through the basics of pretty much how you get buy-in from your team, how you train your team on a new tool. Specifically, we're going to be talking about Process Street as the big example here, but realistically, a lot of these same concepts, you can apply those to not only other tools, but also the concept of bringing on new initiatives or new strategies to your team. So you can reuse these same principles over and over again for lots of different things, and you can share these concepts with other people as well, if they're working on other stuff, even if it isn't Process Street. All right, so today we're going to be going through, first off, just a quick thing about how, what you've gotten to, what you've done before you've gotten to this point. If you're talking about, training your team, what you've done before we've gotten here. Then we're going to talk really quickly about the generals of what happens next. What are your objectives? And then we're going to talk about the challenges that you are likely to face or you may face as a part of this, just being realistic. And we're going to do a little bit something a little bit interesting. We're going to be talking about the neuroscience of change. So, and you'll hear me say this more, of course, but everything that we're talking about today in terms of these strategies, they actually relate back to neuroscience. They relate back to the brain and how people actually think and how that works biologically and how you can actually use that to your advantage. As well, we're going to be talking about some of the actual techniques on how to overcome the challenges that I mentioned. So realistically, those that's going to be the big bulk of this webinar is actually going to be those techniques. And then also we're going to be talking about the different types of challenges based off of different groups and how you're going to overcome those as well. All right, so what we're going to do here is let's go ahead and jump into this. But first off, before we do, I want to mention, because this is the #1 question that I always get on any of these webinars. Yes, it is being recorded. It is being recorded right now. Okay, so what's going to happen is that for all registrants, anyone who registered, regardless of if they actually attend or not, they will be receiving a follow-up email in the next week or so, give or take, around there, with a link to this recording. We'll also include the link to the Best Practices Part 1 that we did last month, as well as any other resources that I mentioned during this webinar. Okay, so feel free. Again, this is being recorded, so you don't have to take meticulous notes. Okay, the other big thing I want to mention as well, speaking of questions, is that there are two things here in Zoom where people can kind of submit things, but there's only one that I actually want you to use. Okay, so there is a chat. That's where you just put in to say where you are calling from, and that is useful if you have anything like you're having issues hearing things, you don't see my screen, or it's more of a technical thing, right? So I've got people on the line here from our customer success team who are here to help you out, that can sort of work with you if you're having any sort of technical issues. So if you need, you can reach out there. However, if you have any other kind of question, so any kind of question regarding the webinar, regarding regarding the content, regarding Process Street, something like that, please use the Q&A button on your screen. There's a little thing that has a Q on it. Okay, so what you're going to do there is you're just going to go ahead and click that. That's where you're going to submit your questions. And I want you to do that at all times throughout the webinar. Go ahead and submit them. I'm not going to stop at all times throughout the webinar. That's inefficient. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop in the middle, and I will stop at the end to take your questions, kind of go through and answer them. Okay, so please do submit your questions using the Q&A button. I'm only going to be able to answer those questions. That's where I'm going to be looking, and my team will be looking in the chat for technical issues. Okay, so please try to keep those two separate, so that way we're doing this in the most efficient way possible and you get your question answered. All right, so let's actually get started. First off, how did we actually get here? So if we're at the point now where you're looking to onboard your team or train your team on a new tool, maybe it's Process Street, maybe it's a different tool, or maybe it's just a new initiative that you're trying to launch or a new strategy. Well, what you had to have done, first off, is that you had to have identified, hey, there's some change that needed to be done. Maybe you've looked at different solutions and then you've decided on one. Now, if you are not at that point yet and you're watching this, what I recommend is that later on, go back and watch the Best Practices Part 1. We did that last week. Last month. My colleague Anne did an excellent job with that. That was all about prioritizing your your processes, prioritizing, how you make these changes. So definitely go through and take a look at that as well. But the whole point here is that at this point, you have identified that change needs to be made. You have ideally identified a solution and prioritized it. And now you're looking to actually bring that out to your team and try and get that human buy-in, which can honestly be one of the most difficult aspects of doing any sort of change. So what do you actually need to do from this point forward? What are your objectives? Well, it's realistically, to really simplify it down as simple as it could possibly go, there's two main objectives. One, you need to introduce your team to the tool or the idea. So of course, with Process Street, that means you need to introduce them to both the concept that it exists and that you guys are going to be using it, but then also introducing them to some of the basics of how you would use it, how they're going to actually use it. Okay, so it's a strategy behind it too. Now, the next part, and actually the harder part, is getting them to actually use it, getting them to actually go about and change their behavior. So that can be pretty difficult. And the reasons why that could be difficult are these right here. These are your challenges that you're typically going to face. One thing I will mention later on in this broadcast, I will be talking about essentially other challenges that sort of layer on top of these that are more specific to different types of groups. But these are challenges that you will typically see across all groups, okay? First off, there are variable learning curves. Everyone is different. So when you're talking about implementing change, new tools, new strategies, etc., everyone has a different level of familiarity to that particular idea or that tool. Maybe if it's something that is actually a new tool like Process Street, maybe you have some people who are more technologically challenged, more technologically able, people who are new employees, old employees, everything, right? You have different learning curves that you're dealing with. So one standard approach is not necessarily going to work for everybody, and you need to keep that in mind from the beginning. Next, change can be overwhelming, right? So for pretty much everybody, change is overwhelming. It's just a part of your brain. Your brain likes routine, right? It likes sticking to the normal things, right? But change can really mess that up. And for a lot of people, that can be overwhelming, even though change is often really, really good, okay? So understand that for everyone, change can be overwhelming. If you understand that from the get-go, you know that you can sort of, you can expect that, and then you can sort of solve for it using some of the mechanisms that I'm going to be showing you later on. Now, the next part of that, speaking of change, is that what you are likely to be doing is what's called top-down change, right? So it's forced almost, in the sense that you may be a director, a manager, something along those lines, and now you are trying to get people who work for you or work with you to change, right? It's not their idea, it's coming from you, and therefore it's coming downwards. So you need to understand that that can be another layer of difficulty that you may be facing as well, because if somebody is changing themselves, that's already difficult, but if somebody's telling you to change, especially if you don't actually want to, it is extremely difficult, okay? So another thing you need to just kind of realize, and again, the strategies I'm going to be talking about address these as well. Now, the final thing is that what you are actually doing with this change is that you are modifying behavior. And that might be new employees, that might be existing employees, that might be supervisors, and that might be other teams. And of course, you have yourself as well, but I'll leave that out. So the idea here is we're going to actually talk about those different types of groups and those different challenges later on of each of those 4 groups that you see there. Okay, so before I get into the techniques of this, what I actually want to talk about first here is the fact that any type of change that we're discussing, well, so change, yeah, we're talking about the concept of maybe you're changing your strategy, you're changing your tool sets, right? We're talking about technology, we're talking about business implementation, etc. But if we really boil it down, change is at the human level. Change is humans. You're changing behavior, and behavior is underdone by humans, and humans have brains, right? So what I need to talk about here first is the neuroscience of change, so you understand what you're going up against. So these are the 3 systems, and there's obviously other ones that sort of are involved as well, but these are the 3 main systems in your brain that have a role to play in change and in habits, okay? First off, you have what's called the prefrontal cortex, right? That is the part of your brain. It sits right sort of above your temples, right behind like the front part of your brain, just a little bit behind. That's why it's prefrontal. And what that does is that is the part of the brain that controls logical decision making. So anytime that you are thinking through a difficult decision, you are learning something new, you are sort of, actively kind of going through and taking information and digesting it and trying to work and make decisions off of it. That is what's called the prefrontal cortex that's doing that. And it is this extremely energy intensive that you are going through and having to make those manual decisions. It's a difficult part of your brain to kind of work through, right? Next is what's called the basal ganglia. Basal ganglia, that controls automatic and procedural decisions. Now, when you're talking about habits or new procedures or new tools, the first thing that you're dealing with is the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain that's going to say, okay, well, now I need to understand what this tool is and how I might need to use it and how it works. That's where you're really having to sit there and learn this new thing. The basal ganglia is, well, once you've started using it for a while, you continue to use it over and over and over again. What that part is, that sort of moves your memories from the front part of your brain to this sort of mid part of your brain where it is now sort of automating this decision. It's kind of the same concept of when you go and take a shower every day, you're not having to think about everything you need to do because you're just going to go do it, right? So that is this part of the brain that sort of stores that automatic behavior, right? So it's sort of muscle memory. And so that's where it's sort of getting built in there, and that's sort of controlling these procedural decisions, okay? And then finally, you have the amygdala. The amygdala is actually involved with the basal ganglia as well, and realistically what it does is that it is the reward center of the brain. What it does is that when you do something over and over again, and realistically you create a pattern, the way that that pattern is created is via rewards. So if you do something well, you learn something new, and then you continue to do it, and you're comfortable with it, that comfort is actually a chemical in your brain being released by your amygdala to say, hey, you did this thing, I'm really comfortable with it, keep doing it, okay? So when you're dealing with change, what you're doing is that you are now going against this pathway. So somebody has already taken in the information, they've already, over time, they've, done it over and over and over again, they've sort of made it into an automated system in their brain, and they receive rewards for it, right? So now you need to create a new system of change, and you need to speak to each part of the brain in order to actually instill this new change that you are looking for. If you try and go against it, it will completely work against you. But if you try and work with it, which is what I'm going to be teaching you today, you're going to be able to instill change massively easier than you would otherwise. All right, so let's actually get into it. I know this is a little bit crazy, but once I get into the specifics of how that actually works, it'll make a lot more sense. So here are your techniques for success. Ready? Step number one. This is where you're speaking to that front part of the brain. This is where you need to share your vision, right? Because if you just try and throw something onto somebody and they have no idea why it's happening, they're never going to relate to it, right? People are smart. Your employees are intelligent people. You need to just sit them down, and I recommend that you do this maybe in a large group setting, or if you have a smaller team, one by one, and you discuss with them and you say, hey, listen, here's the problems that we were facing with this last strategy or this last tool, and here are the things that, that we're looking to achieve by using this new strategy or this new tool. And here are the benefits that you can expect, right? And you don't want to generalize those. You actually want to go one by one. So realistically, at this point, you can actually have one-by-one meetings with people. And you want to speak with them and talk to them about the specific benefits that they can expect. So talk to them about, hey, in your job, you're spending all this time having to do this, this past process. You're doing it manually, and that's terrible, is wasting all this time. But now, for example, if you're using Process Street, you're going to be able to automate that process that used to take you a week is now going to take you less than an hour, right? So now you have all that time left that you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about messing it up. You don't have to train anybody on it. Essentially letting them know what are the specific benefits for what they're going to actually get. Okay, so you want to personalize those so that they understand that. Again, this is that front part of the brain where they're working rationally, where they're understanding rationally, where you're coming from, why you're doing this, and what they can expect out of it. What's the rewards that they're going to get, okay? So then step number two kind of fits into that next part, right? So now beyond you just introducing the idea to them, the concept to them, and the importance to them so that they sort of connect with it, the next thing is that you need to then provide tailored instruction. And this is where you're going to consider the fact that everyone is different. As I mentioned that earlier, there's variable learning curves. Everyone is different. And the big part of that is that everyone learns in a different way and maybe starting from a different place, okay? So what I recommend that you do at this stage is that first off, just as like a general thing, and this is a good time where you may have done the previous step, the sharing your vision, is that you maybe do a really quick sort of overview of the new tool or the new strategy. So you kind of explain it in a more general fashion, knowing that you're not going to, they're not going to understand the full concept this first time around, but at least they've seen it and they get the gist, right, in an efficient manner. So you can do group instruction, but the important thing here is that you don't just stop here. Most people stop at this point, and then maybe 5 people out of 100 actually get the point, right? So you want to make sure that you do this just so that way you sort of disseminate the idea generally and that you've connected with people, but don't go overboard with detail, okay? Because the next thing you want to do is that's where you want to then actually break it down into individualized instruction, okay? So again, everyone learns in their own way. Some people like reading, right? So you want to provide people help docs, right? A link to that resources, the help docs, best practices. Here at Process Street, we have those. We have a getting started guide in our help docs, which I definitely recommend that you check out or you send to people if you're trying to get them going. Next, maybe some people like videos, right? So we have a webinar we do every month. We have tons of videos on our YouTube channel and on our in our help docs that you can go and you can check out. Again, this is just specific to Process Street, but most tools have some version of this. So you want to look to see what, whatever you can do that's going to, give the most instruction in the most, effective way possible. Okay, so those are videos, webinars, help docs, again, just whatever sort of things that people like, for them, the best ways that they learn, you want to sort of provide as many as possible so that they can choose, okay? So the biggest way though, this goes, obviously some people learn better this way than others, but in general, especially for something like Process Street, people learn best hands-on, okay? So people learn best when they are actually doing it, right? And what we're talking about here, right, when we're going from the, getting the context, getting the idea, the concept of, essentially what this new tool or this new system is, well, now you actually need to get them into the behavior, right? The behavior of actually using it. And in order to instill that behavior, you need to actually start using it. Of course, you need to start that somewhere, and then you can continue to do it, and that's how you build the behavior. And that leads me now to step 3, okay? So this is now moving from the front part of the brain now back to the mid part of the brain there, basal ganglia, the part where you're actually dealing with, again, repetitive behaviors and automating things, right? So now they understand the tool, they understand why you're using it, they understand the basics of, what the different components of it are, right? But now they need to actually use it. And this is where you want to use essentially peer pressure to do that, right? So peer pressure maybe worked on you in maybe negative ways in high school and college, or I mean, that's debatable, up to you, but in here, you can actually use it to your advantage. So first thing you want to do, you want to identify leaders, okay? Leaders, those may be, natural leaders in the sense of they may be your directors, your managers, something along those lines already, right? Or maybe they're not. Maybe they're, they're new employees. Maybe they're new individuals that have used the tool or the strategy before and therefore are already, a thought leader in that space, at least in your company, right? So what you want to do is you want to identify people who are already engaged, already, really on board with what you're doing. You're not, putting in a ton of effort to try and get them to use it because they're already either incentivized by having to be leaders to teach other people or incentivized by already having experience, okay? So you want to identify, some leaders, and I typically recommend that you're going to have, essentially 1 leader per 5 to 10 people, that sort of a thing in your company. So if you've got 50 people, you may want to have 5 to 10 leaders, okay? So from there, the next thing you want to do is that you're going to work first off with the leaders. You want to make sure that they have a good understanding of the tool itself first. So you may want to meet with them individually or, as a small group, of course, and sort of make sure that they have the training, they have the understanding, they know where the resources are. That way they can answer questions, right? They can sort of get the idea ahead of time, right? And then from there, what you're going to be asking them to do is you're going to ask them to then meet one-on-one with each of the, the people in their group, each of their peers, okay? You're going to ask them to meet with them and create a personalized goal, right? So each person has a personalized goal with their leader. So in Process Street, for example, what we typically recommend, and this is based off of whether or not somebody is going to be a process builder, so somebody who's going to be creating templates, or just a process user, right? So somebody who's not creating any templates, they're just going to run checklists, okay? So if they're a process builder, we recommend that the personalized goal there, of course, is, in the first day or two, identify a priority process. That's what we talked about again in that last webinar. How do you identify what that really important thing is that you want to systemize? And then from there, in the first week, you want to get maybe the first set of steps, or even get the whole, the whole process, depending on how long it is, documented as a template, okay? So that's the personalized goal. And then maybe the second week is you start using it, right? So you want to essentially have them set personalized goals with their people, and you want to make sure that those goals have deadlines, okay? And in addition to deadlines, you want to make sure that those have check-ins, that those leaders are regularly checking in at each of those deadlines. So it's in a good sort of check-in amount of time is usually about every week. So, have a one-on-one every week. If they're just meeting, with those people, maybe for 30 minutes each, for 5 people or something like that, that's not that bad. You just have them sort of just check in. This is just a temporary thing. But again, just have them checking in, setting those goals, making sure you're actually setting those deadlines. And then if you identify any sort of, roadblocks, or if people aren't hitting their goals, that they're also working with them to mitigate, identify what the issue is, and then mitigate those items, okay? So, you don't have time, we can help you open up that time, or, remove things off of your plate, or, help you prioritize, etc. Okay? Now, from there, as that system is continually going, right, what you want to do at that point is you want to reward their behavior and gather feedback, okay? So, a couple things there. Now, this is now going from the, again, the basal ganglia part of the brain to the amygdala. This is the reward center of the brain. This is where you are creating rewards that are going to replace the natural rewards that they were getting previously from following that old process or using that old tool, okay? So now you want to give them new rewards that are going to bring that up, okay? So in that case, what you want to do is you want to first off publicly reward employees. This is still peer pressure here, right? And this is also just rewards in general. People like to be, appreciated. So what you want to do is typically what I recommend is maybe once a week, you as the, as the leader of this, maybe you get all of the feedback from all of the other leaders to say that, these are the people who have achieved their goals. This is the goal that they're working on. This is the strategy that's worked. And this is, the thing that they've done. So now what you want to do is you want to share that maybe in an email or something like that, or post it somewhere to say, look at these people, they're doing a great job. They've achieved their goals. And these are the strategies that they've tried that have worked. So share that out there. Another thing you can do, you can also instill maybe some friendly competition. Obviously, you can decide this with your team here, but what I recommend here in this case, we've seen a lot of companies do it where they'll have, say, one template that their company is using, and everyone is running checklists off of it, right? So what we'll do is we'll recommend that maybe they do a count of how many checklists were run per person by the end of the month. So the person who runs the most checklists, gets a $100 Amazon gift card, just as an example, right? Or gets a bonus, right? So it's a reward, it's an incentive that creates some friendly competition to make everyone want to use it. So it's just another way to sort of incentivize that. Some people take, like certain rewards, they just like, some public, announcement of how good they're doing. Sometimes they like actual money. It's realistically up to you on what you want to use, but a big thing here is you want to also make sure that you're never shaming people, okay? I don't know how many of you guys have dogs, but if you do, and if you've ever trained a dog, you will know that you typically want to just do positive reinforcement. That's what this is. Humans are similar to dogs in this regard, where you are just using positive reinforcement. You are just providing rewards if they do the right thing, but if they don't, you don't want to punish them. That doesn't actually work. You want to work with them to identify what is actually happening, why they're not hitting their goals, help them mitigate it, help them fix it. If there's a large there's a large amount of, say, complaints or issues that are very similar that you keep seeing over and over again, right? So a lot of people are having trouble understanding the tool. A lot of people don't have enough time, whatever it might be. You want to identify that, and then you want to work to solve that. If they're not understanding it, find out what they're not understanding, and provide more resources specific to those things, provide additional training for those things. That's another idea that you can do there. But again, you want to just address common complaints or issues. You're continually gathering feedback and addressing them, but you're doing this in a good system. So it's going to be a lot easier for you, and that you're going to continue to highlight successes, okay? The other big thing here that you want to do as well, that I didn't actually make a slide for, but it's just a good point, is that depending on the tool, for example, like Process Street, you want to automate things whenever you can. So a good example here is the scheduled checklist. So you can automate a checklist to be run in Process Street, say every month, every week, every day. I recommend that you utilize that. So if your tool or whatever you're doing has the ability to be automated, so that way it can automatically run things, so you don't actually even have to have a person do it, that's always better too, okay? So it's another sort of thing that you're just instilling repetitive behavior and rewarding that repetitive behavior, so that way it sort of replaces the old repetitive behavior, okay? So that's what you're doing. You're not working against the pathway, you're using the pathway in a new way, essentially giving it a new sort of thing to connect to. And therefore, of course, there you go. You're going to end up having good results. Okay, so this is my first break here. I'm going to be going in the second half after this. I'm going to be going through the different types of challenges and the different ways you're going to face those and overcome them based off of different groups. Before I do that, I'm going to take a second here to answer some questions. So please feel free, go ahead and submit some questions here. I'll just wait for, this is going to be a short session, so I will only answer a few this time around. But then in the second half here at the end of that, I will be doing a second one where I will go longer. So what questions do you guys have about these concepts or anything along those lines up to this point? I knew it. I knew I was going to get this question. I knew it. Okay, Hazim. Excellent point. What can I do if I find that my subordinate is careless? Well, so the first thing I'm going to say here, and so I'll answer this in levels. The very first level of this is don't hire people who are careless. I mean, obviously it's too late if you already identify this at this point. But very first thing is whenever you're hiring, just try to, of course, hire good people. Be very, very, very diligent. I mean, if anything, I've worked with, thousands of companies, and the big thing that I have to tell you, the number one thing is always spend a ridiculous amount of time going through and being, very, very discerning about identifying people who are going to really care based off of their actions. But I know, of course, at this point, you've identified that they're careless, which means you've already hired them, they're already on. Nothing really you could do there in terms of the pre-hiring stuff. So what you want to do is you want to identify why they're being careless, okay? So they might be careless for a few sets of reasons. One, they might be careless just because they're overwhelmed, or they're scared, or they don't understand. They feel like their job is changing, right? So if they're careless for those reasons, that's where you need to level with them. You need to talk to them, understand, really get to the root of it, and let them know that no, like, we're doing this to help you out. Like, this isn't to replace you. This isn't to get rid of your job. This isn't to and we're all going through this change together. Like, realistically, level with them, relate with them, and help them understand, right? If they're being careless for, other reasons, right? Like if they're being careless purely because they're just careless, I mean, I don't want to tell you to fire someone, but you might need to. I mean, if they're not doing their job, right? And they're being completely careless, at the end of all of this, again, you want to make sure that it's not for some other reason, right? Because oftentimes people can be what it seems to you careless, but it's for other reasons. Obviously, be understanding. Don't just fire someone. But if at the end of the day, after everything, you've worked with them and they're just not going to work with you on this, I mean, that's how that goes sometimes, unfortunately, but that's human nature, right? So then otherwise, let's see here. What are the best tactics to developing goals that are actionable versus goals that are very generic? Excellent. Yes. So very, very good point there. And thank you, Haley. So realistically, when we're talking about goals, and this actually goes for goals, by the way, all of this that I'm saying, so if you're ever having to do any sort of goal setting for yourself, for example, say after New Year's or anything along those lines, these exact same principles actually apply, right? It's the same exact concepts, it's the same pathway, everything, right? Whether it's organizational change or personal change. So either way, you always want to have specific, I mean, if you guys have ever heard of SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. I forget now. So I don't remember the exact letters, but that's pretty much it. But the idea here is that you do want to have very specific goals, okay? So you don't want them to be generic, right? You actually want them to be measurable and specific, okay? And realistic, right? So in that case, you want them to be, as an example here, I'm going to use Process Street because that's the one that we work with the most. The specific goal is you want to have your, your first off, you want to break it up. So you want to say you want to have your priority process, what process you're going to build identified within the next 2 days, right? And then you want to have the, just the tasks of it built out in the next week. And then you want to have the form fields added the next week. And then you want to have, the everything else in terms of like, assignments or maybe some other content or anything like that added by the next week, right? So these are very specific goals that have a timeline. They're measurable. In this case, with Process Streets, either you did it or you didn't, or you could say something like, you have to run 5 checklists by the next week. That's a very specific and measurable goal, right? So both of these, you want to make sure that you're always doing very specific. You don't want to just say, use the tool, right? That's very generic. You don't want to say anything like, understand the tool. No, 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 don't do that. Obviously, you want to make sure that it's more along the lines of something that they're actually trying to achieve. And there may be things that they need to do as a part of that. So using the tool and understanding the tool are parts of creating a template or running a checklist, right? But those are not measurable. You want to do the measurable thing, and that way it's something they can actually aim at, all right? So those are the things you want to consider there. Is you want to just know, is this something that I can actually very, very basically say yes or no, or actually have a number tied to? And is it something that's specific, right? So if you can't do that, if you can't actually measure it, then you need to come up with a better goal. All right, any other questions here? Otherwise, I'm going to keep going on to the second part of this. I'll wait just a second to see if there's any others. All right, it looks like we're good on this side. So in that case, let me go ahead and continue forward here. All right, here we go. All right, so these are different challenges for different groups, okay? So what I've talked about before, when I talk about challenges, they all still apply, right? And the sort of things you're gonna be doing all still apply regardless. But those are more or less, I will say, for your employees, for people that are working with you on your team. It's the direct people that you're going for, you're trying to get them to change, right? And within that group, there may be, sort of other subsets that might be, might have different challenges in general, okay? And I picked just a couple here. There's other subsets, there's other ways you could sort of break this up. And I'll speak about that a little bit more as well, but realistically, these are the 4 big ones that you're gonna be facing, okay? All right, first off, existing employees, okay? So existing employees are typically going to be, and I know how odd this may seem, are typically going to be the most difficult bunch for you to change. Okay, when I explain this, it's going to make total sense. But for a lot of people, it could be like, well, no, they're loyal to me. They've been working with me forever. They're so good at their job. I'm sure they are. And the better that they are at their job, the more difficult the change is going to be, because they're stuck in their ways, right? They've been doing a thing very well, probably, for a very long time, right? Obviously, don't fix a system if it's not broken. So if you're not, obviously, if you're making a change, it's not just for no reason. It is because there actually is something wrong, right? That you want to address or make something better. But in this case, of course, they've been doing something for so long, potentially, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. The longer that they've been doing it, the more ingrained it is in their brain, the more automatic this is, and the more difficult it's going to be for you to have to sort of unwind that and put in something new, okay? So all of the things that I mentioned earlier are even more important when we're dealing with existing employees, especially the eldest employees, okay? So there's 2 things you want to do here. First off, you want to identify the difficulties, right? So you want to identify their specific difficulties that they are having. They're probably going to be the ones that are going to have the most complaints about this new tool or this new strategy, because they're used to something in another way, and change is scary, change is new. So the natural gut reaction of all humans to change is to say no, okay, and to find problems with it. So they're going to find all of the things like oh God, this old system, I could look this thing up so quickly. I had all these things that I could do with this, this, and this. And now I gotta use this new thing, and it makes no sense to me. And I don't know where to find anything, and all this other stuff, right? They're gonna find all of these issues. And the big thing here you want to consider is that those are real. Those are real difficulties that they are actually feeling. Do not dismiss them, okay? I know that I'm saying it as a generalization, that you can expect this, and you should, but know that they are real, okay? So first thing, you need to have a real talk with these people, and you need to let them flesh all of these things out. Let them tell you all of the problems that they're having, and really understand them and really take them to heart, okay? So just know that you're going to hear them. That's fine. Now, there's 2 things you need to do with that. One, you need to actually, if there's some things that are actual difficulties that you can actually address, they can't find a thing, well, show them how to find a thing. If they have, if it used to be a lot faster for them to find something or to do something, show them how that they can do that even faster with this new tool, obviously once they learn how to do it. The other thing, and the big thing, is that you want to counter with benefits, okay, with the big benefits. In Process Street specifically, again, I'm going to use Process Street as the example here. We find that existing employees are the ones that typically give you the biggest, the most trouble when you're trying to make these changes. And there are two main benefits that they actually receive as a part of using the tool, okay? These are the two benefits. First off, they do not need to train people either at all or much, much less than they used to, okay? So think about it. In Process Street, you're storing your processes, you're documenting your processes. Previously, before they were using the tool, those processes probably existed either on a Word doc or in their brain, which meant that if they hired somebody new or somebody else came on the team that was going to pick up some responsibility on that process, maybe it's a sales process or something like that. Well, now the veterans had to teach those new people painstakingly every single step over and over again, and watch over them every little, like a hawk over every little thing, and try and help them through it, right? So now, since it's actually documented, they only had to document it once. For every new person, well, that new person just goes and reads that template, and they can just ask them any questions that they have. But rather than having to explain everything to that new person, the new person is just be able to take care of it themselves, ask whatever questions they have. And once that person's actually running checklists, that existing employee can easily tell, first off, I know that they're following the process because I can see it right here. And also, if they aren't, I can see where they messed up, right? So it's really easy. They're not having to look over every little step. It's going to save them a lot of time. The analogy I like to give to people is, think about the next time you're in Fiji or the next time you're on vacation. Do you want your employee, your new employee, or somebody on your team to have to call you to ask you questions about how to do something? No, please do not bother me as I am on a beach, right? So in this case, what you're able to do is you're able to go ahead and make sure that they're understanding, like, okay, yeah, I'm going to be happy because I will be somewhere else and someone else can take this over and be good, and I don't have to worry about it, right? So that's one of the first benefits. The second benefit is automation, right? So previously, if they're doing a process manually, for example, maybe they're onboarding a new client, they're going to be going through and they're having to, actually, go through and create a Word document or something like that, writing up everything about the employee, about the new customer, looking at all the different tools, having to find out all the information, put it in one place, call that customer up, figure out, you're trying to remember to do all the steps. Maybe they're making mistakes, generating a legal document or something like that for the customer to sign, where they have to actually send it over to them and wait and all this stuff, right? We're having to contact other people, et cetera. Just lots and lots of manual labor that's not fun, right? So instead, if you can automate it, what you can do is you can actually replace the work that person has to do by connecting, say, for example, Process Street to lots of tools like HelloSign, their CRM, to your email, to automatically, notifying different people, setting due dates on things, reminding people to get stuff done, filling stuff out, all of this stuff, right? So what I recommend there, of course, is you let them know that, yes, now you have to actually record your process by checking these things off, but by checking these things off, you can set it up so that instead of manually now spending, a day having to do that task, you just check the task off and it's done in an instant, right? So talk to them about those benefits. Those are ones that almost no employee ever thinks about when they first get in here. So it just seems like more work, when realistically it's less work. So if you never tell them that, they will never get buy-in. So you want to make sure that you're telling them their specific benefit. Those are the big ones for existing employees specific to Process Street. But of course, identify that for whatever tool or strategy you are looking at. The other big thing you want to do is you want to use this as an opportunity to provide them with greater responsibility or involvement, okay? So they're veterans, right? So they're going to have some sense of pride about that, right? So what you want to do is you want to give this as an opportunity to make them one of those leaders. So typically people do better if they're having to hold other people accountable. Or, maybe just as a temporary thing, or maybe you actually want to make them a manager, right? Maybe you actually want to use this as an opportunity to, to give them a promotion. So when people get that, they get a bump, and they're way more willing to actually make these changes and also help others through these changes. So if you're looking to do that at some point, this is a good time to use that sort of lever to get some better buy-in from these individuals who will otherwise be really difficult. And that is especially in comparison to new employees. Okay, new employees, brand new employees, are going to be actually some of the easiest people for you to make these changes with, because realistically, it's not a change. It's still new. Everything is brand new to them. The big challenge you are going to have with them, it's the same challenge you would have regardless, is that everything is new. And therefore, you need to provide them with additional support, additional guidance, additional instruction. So for them, it's not so much modifying behavior. It's more just giving them the context and giving them the instruction. Okay, so you want to make sure that they're getting more and more of that and they have a good support system. Something you want to do regardless for new employees, but especially when you're also having new employees with this change. Okay. Now, the other thing and the big thing, and this actually goes back to existing employees, is that you want to identify, whenever there's going to be existing employees that are seeding negativity with new employees. This is a very common thing. So the new employee, everything is brand new and shiny to them, right? So they don't have any negative feelings about this new tool that you guys are switching over to. But they're going to be hanging out with those existing employees who are going to be saying, well, the way I used to do this was so much better, and this other tool was great, and blah, 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 all those other sorts of things. That can seed negativity when there's no reason to have it. So what you want to do first off is address that that's a thing that can happen. Second, you want to actually talk to the existing employee, and you want to address the actual root of those feelings, like I mentioned before. Talk to them, level with them, etc. Help them see the benefits. And then third, just let them know, both the existing employee and the new employee, yes, this is a new tool. Yes, you have some legit feelings about this, but obviously there's some big benefits with this. Don't want to get you down. Feel positive about it, right? So you want to make sure that they're not seeding this negativity and that you're addressing it head on. Now, everything that I've mentioned so far has been sort of from you downwards, right? And I don't know if you want to even consider it that way, but essentially it is, going from you and your department or you and your team. The other direction you want to consider is upwards, right? Whenever you buy a new tool, of course, unless you are the CEO or something along those lines, you want to consider that, maybe they were the ones who decided, yes, we'll go ahead and pay for this new tool, or yes, we'll go ahead and instill this new strategy. But you actually need to convince them that it's worthwhile. So you continue to do it and then you continue to get buy-in, right? Because you need to prove that it's worth it. So for them, they're typically only going to see the dollar amount of the investment. They're not seeing the day-to-day benefits like you might. You're going to see the qualitative stuff. You're going to see that, these employees are much happier because, they're getting this, they're saving so much time. It's so much more efficient. I'm not having to deal with so many errors. People aren't calling me up as much. They're already not dealing with any of that, so it's not going to matter to them. So what you need to understand is that for them, they just see the price tag. They see that you paid $40,000 for this new tool or whatever it might be, and they're just going to be looking at it like, am I getting $40,000 or more back? Okay. So these are the things that you want to consider when you are, sort of making the case back to them. Is you want to look at things like increased efficiency. So I'm going to talk specifically about Process Street with some of these, but again, a lot of these go for other tools as well. So increased efficiency with Process Street, for example, they're not wasting time doing particular processes. There's reduced errors, right? So you're not having issues with people having to go over and do the same process 2-3 times. There's also greater accountability. Like you can actually see who did what, right? So that's good for reporting or other sorts of things. And speaking of, there's now enhanced reporting. So you can actually say to supervisors, hey, you never had any data on this, and this, like these specific data points or how these things were being done or the timelines or how long these things took. Well, now I can show them to you. Here you go. Every week I can give you this information, for example, right? So you can give them insights into things that they never had. They'll appreciate that. Of course, with that increased efficiency, you get increased productivity. And of course, from that, you also get greater replicability. This is one that's really specific to Process Street, maybe a few other tools. But if you create a process that works for your team, you can now reproduce that. You can immediately just take that effort and just give it to another team. And therefore, the actual effort required, the return on that investment is exponential compared to the actual effort that it took to do that first process. Speaking of, now going on laterally. So this is, we've gone down, we've gone up, this is going left and right. Other teams, okay? So with any sort of initiative or any sort of tool, you need to understand that it is in your best interest to have your teams to your left and right, the ones that you're working with a lot, especially, also using that strategy or that tool, right? Because whatever benefits you are receiving, you're going to lose them if the other teams are not also getting those benefits, and therefore, you're not wasting time with things like, for example, with Process Street, where you get automatic assignments, automatic due dates, automatic notifications, automatic reminders, all of this stuff, the comments and stuff that you can do inside of Process Street. All of these things replace the need for you to have to send emails, to have to, go back and forth in the old way. But if you've got a team that you work with that you need to bring in, but they're not using Process Street, well, it's going to be really difficult because you still now have to send them an email and then wait for that email and all these other sorts of things, versus just also adding them into the, into the process, having them automatically get notified and getting that same benefit. And that's just one example. Obviously, there's other examples with ways that you can get benefits as well, but that's just an idea of where you can kind of see that. So you want to start with teams that work next to you, right? You want to start with the teams that have the most similar needs. So if you are, for example, an enterprise customer success, and you have a large or medium business customer success team, that you work closely with, well, that's a team that you probably want to try and get using this tool next. Because if they start using it, well, now they're the same sort of work that you did, they can actually just take it, make maybe some modifications to it, and they're going to get big benefits from it without having to do all that first upfront work that you did, okay? And then you keep reproducing that to other teams, and you're going to continue to get that huge benefit, which one makes you look good. It's going to make you look good to your supervisors, because you had this idea to come up to start using this tool, right? And now, look at this. The whole organization is so much more efficient. You're saving so much more money, and everything's streamlined and all this other sort of stuff. And your job is easier. So it's actually good on two different sides there, right? So it makes you look good and makes your job easier. So start with similar teams, but also consider that it is your solution versus theirs. So they may already have a solution. You want to look at what that is. You do want yours, typically. Of course, if theirs is better, then you really want to look at that and decide whether or not theirs is better or not. Everyone's going to feel like theirs is the best. But I do recommend, of course, you do want to try pretty hard to try and make it yours. So that way, you're getting that benefit with all of the effort that you did, and therefore you're getting, your job is getting easier because you're not having to retrain anyone or anything like that. Okay, so really quick here, go ahead and start asking some questions. I'm going to do a quick summary of some of the talking points here that I just kind of went through. But then as I'm doing that, please feel free to go ahead and submit some questions. I've already got some in there right now. So continue to submit them. The sooner you get them in, the more likely I'm going to be able to answer some of these. So go ahead and submit. I'm going to try and answer all of them if possible. So do go ahead and start submitting them there. Okay, so as a refresher, what we talked about today is, first off, just the concept that, by the time that you got here, you have prioritized processes, you prioritize a new tool or a new strategy, you've identified, things you want to change, and you're now looking to, launch that with your team, right? So from there, the next thing is that, you've taken a good look at the challenges that you're likely to, to face, just being realistic, understand that these are things that are likely to come up. And then you're understanding also the sort of the background, the basis for those difficulties. Where do those come from? Well, it's coming from, from the brain. It's coming from these, these parts of the brain that control rewards and habits and, the general, thought process around change. Okay, so that's what you're facing. But the thing here is that, those are really well built in. It's a biological and, environmental sort of thing here, evolutionary, but you actually can work with it rather than against it to get your results, right? And so that's where you're going to clearly communicate with everyone what your vision is. You're going to make sure that everyone understands the benefits that are specific for them. You're going to actually work through and make sure that everyone sort of understands the concepts in the ways that work best for them, whatever that might be. You're going to then set up peer networks with leaders that are going to actually, hold people accountable, have regular check-ins, set personalized goals, and actually make sure that they're hitting them and that, getting rid of any issues that come up. And then finally, you're also going ahead and positively rewarding positive behaviors, and you're getting feedback from negative ones, what did or did not work, and you're addressing those as well. But again, you're positively making these sorts of changes, okay? So, and then again, of course, as I mentioned, 4 different groups, big groups that you kind of deal with are existing employees who could be more difficult, but you want to make that an opportunity and really, level with them and provide them their benefits. New employees, as I mentioned, they're going to be a lot easier. Just make sure they're not having any negative things that are being seeded to them and that you're providing them lots of support. Your supervisors who just need to see the dollars and numbers to understand what the big benefits are, and your other teams that you also want to get using the tool or the strategy just so you can get those benefits as well. Okay. Whew, that's my little run through. So let me go ahead and start answering some of these questions. Keep submitting them here. All right. First one from Douglas here. Thank you, Douglas. In your opinion, what is the best productivity stack that has been successful with Process Street? Example, Process Street plus Pipedrive plus Monday plus Slack. So the short answer to that is it really depends on your, what you're trying to get done, like what sort of workflow you're doing, what your work entails, what kind of tasks you're doing, and also the dynamics of your team, okay? So you want to consider that stuff first. And so that sort of is where you're going to have some differences. But I will tell you what I have seen as being really successful in a couple different situations, right? First off, if you're dealing with customers, okay, and a big process that people are dealing with is like customer onboarding. What a big, really useful sort of system is, one, you start off with a CRM. So Salesforce, HubSpot, Zoho, etc. Right? You start off with your a pipe drive. So you start off with your CRM, where you get a new customer. Maybe they go from sales, the op1, something like that. That can then, you could actually already have them in there, have a process for your sales team as well. So they're sort of tangential team. So they're working between the CRM and Process Street at that point. But then maybe what happens is that, they go and they actually become a customer. So at that point, that can automatically generate a customer client onboarding checklist in Process Street, pulls all the data from the CRM, assigns all the appropriate people, sets all the notifications, sets all the due dates, everything. You go through that, you automatically send out a thing to have them book a call. So we use Calendly here, which is really useful for automatically scheduling things. That can also trigger stuff in Process Street as well. So I could schedule checklists to be created. And then from there, maybe you're going through, you're having a call with your customer, you're talking to your customer. You already have all their data right there. You're taking down your notes in Process Street. They're following the process. Even if it's conditional, you can handle that variably with conditional logic. And then maybe you need to send some stuff out, whatever you need to do. You can, again, do that still Process Street to whatever tool you like. And then from there, once you're done, you can just check something off, push all that data, including your new notes, into something like back into your CRM, create a doc, in Google Docs, maybe create a note or a message inside of Slack. It's another thing that you could possibly use as well. If you're something like a marketer, or maybe you create content, then what we typically see that works really well for that is something like Airtable or Trello and Process Street. So that's where you might have something like, you move a particular card to a list, or you have a particular status inside of Airtable on a particular row. Where you're, something like an article idea or something like that goes into production. And then that runs a checklist in Process Street, pulls all the details from the card or from that row, and then automatically, runs a checklist, assigns the appropriate person who did that. And then they start working on it, and then you go back and forth, maybe notifying people in something like Slack to let, to notify, different stages or something like that. And at the end, of course, you can just push things around in the other services like Trello or Airtable at that point. Again, there are about 2,000 something different tools. So those are some of the ones that I see work really well. But again, it really depends on your workflow, like what you're actually trying to do. So if you want, you can let me know what you're trying to get done. I can provide some more specific examples. Okay. How do I handle situations where an existing employee feels left out and is seeding doubt? Yes, excellent question. And again, that is a common one. The very first thing you want to do is meet with them, find out why they feel left out and why they're seeding doubt. A lot of people, and no offense on any of this, but to be honest with you, a lot of older people maybe who have been working for a company for a long time, and they might be older in the sense of they've been working there for a while, or they might even be older in the sense of they're just older. The change is going to be more difficult because they have a longer amount of time where they've, instilled a particular way that they feel comfortable with, and therefore change is going to be even scarier, okay? So you want to identify that. You want to talk to them and just, understand where they're coming from, understand, why they're feeling those feelings, why do they feel left out? And realistically, what I recommend doing is using that as an opportunity there to, give them some responsibility, give them some empowerment, right? You want to engage them. You want to get their input, so have them engage from early on to identify tools, right? So if you find somebody who you think is going to run into that situation, the earlier you get them involved, the better, so that way they feel the most involved, the most engaged. And then, at that point, if you're doing that, they're going to have a much better chance of working with you rather than against you. And they're not going to see doubt because they're going to be going against their own interests, okay? You can tie a bonus to them, making the whole thing work well, right? So if part of their bonus is that they need to make the system, launch it with, half the team or something, well, they're not going to want to see doubt because now they're not going to be able to get their bonus. That's another thing you could do as well. It's sort of an incentive. So again, it's really finding the reasons, the real reasons, sitting down, finding it out, addressing those, and then getting them involved in that way, preventing them seeding doubt. Again, if they're still seeding doubt after all of that, either A, you haven't addressed the real reason, or B, that's just what they are and they're toxic. Again, that's not a good employee to have. So another thing to consider there. Sometimes, you know, these moments can be ones that can be kind of difficult for identifying, you know, people who might be causing these sort of issues just because that's just maybe their personality, right? So it's usually not. You want to identify the other reasons first, but that might be another thing as well. So another question here, what is the best way to control time management for my team? Thank you, Hazim, for that. Realistically, when you're talking about time management goes in a couple different directions. First off, there is personal time management, and you want to sort of instill personal time management in your team in general. That's a good thing to do. And again, another thing you want to consider is the type of work that people are doing. So first off, with time management, what you want to consider is, first off, you know, what are the types of work that each person is doing? And realistically, you can do this, and also they need to do this. They need to kind of go through and say, what are the tasks that I do? What are the different types of tasks that I do? And what kind of, you know, say what kind of focus does that require, right? So what you want to do, right, you're going to say, okay, well, these people do a lot of meetings and they do a little bit of administrative work. These people do support, so they're mostly doing administrative work, or maybe complex tasks, right? These people are more creative, so they're going to be doing more creative work. And you want to identify each of those first, okay? And you want to identify how much of each of those different types of work a person is doing in a given week. Obviously, it fluctuates, but you want to try and find an average, right? Then what you want to do is you want to work with each individual to have them identify when they do different types of work best, okay? When are they best at doing meetings in the day? When are they best at doing creative work, or when are they best at doing administrative work throughout the day, okay? Then from there, once they've identified the types of tasks they do, how much of those they need to do, and you know what the different time periods are that they're best at doing each of those, put those two things together. I recommend, this is something that we have our team do here, I recommend that in your calendar, and realistically in their calendars, they create preset blocks of time, and they can either be busy or free depending on the nature of your work, but just preset blocks of time that just say, you know, and they have them repeat, you know, this is my 3-hour period of the day where I'm doing creative work, right? Where I'm going to sit down and do this creative stuff. There's an hour at the beginning, an hour at the end where I'm doing administrative work, and everything in between is my time that I'm going to open myself up for meetings, okay? So first off, doing all of those things is going to help people to be clear about their time and understanding when they're best at doing things. If you don't allot time for doing things, you're just not going to ever get it done, right? So it's a big concept there. Next thing is prioritization. That's a big one that a lot of people miss out on. So you want to consider that this is you and everyone else. So you, from top down and then individually, everyone is identifying, you know, in addition to, you know, what are the things that I need to get done? Okay, these are the tasks that I need to do, either recurring ones or one-off tasks. You want to consider, you know, then the priority of those. You know, what is highest priority? What are the things that are so critical that if they don't get done, the business will fail? And lowest priority, these things don't really matter, I can push them off, right? So just kind of be realistic about those and make sure that you've aligned those priorities across the organization so that, you know, each person sort of agrees that, you know, yes, this is right, this is not right, et cetera. And that'll that will help them to be able to properly then slot each of those things into those sets, into those time blocks, right? So highest priority creative is going to go at that first creative block during the week. It's going to go right in there. And if it's a 3-hour task, it'll go in that 3-hour thing, use it up, they're done in the day. Easy, right? And then from there, the other thing you want to do is you want to leverage technology, okay? So you want to leverage things like Process Street, the calendar, maybe Airtable, et cetera, to be able to essentially isolate different sort of tasks or processes, and of course, automate them when possible. So if there's things that are repetitive or manual, they're being automated so that people don't actually have to do them. That's a big thing for time management. So it's actually how you become more efficient generally. So what you're going to do at that point is, you know, in your calendar, you have a clear idea of what you should or shouldn't be doing, and you know exactly what you're doing at different times. So you can just focus. You don't have to worry about it, okay? Next, you have a good task tracking tool, and that could be something like Airtable if it's something like content or projects you need to get done. It could be Jira if you're a developer. It could be, you know, whatever it might be. It could be Asana, you know, if you're depending on what you're looking to get done. Or heck, I mean, it could just be a pen and paper if it's just for you, right? That's fine too. So whatever works, you just kind of have a good place to kind of keep your tasks straight. You have a good place to kind of keep track of your time. You have a good place then to communicate, you know, what things are happening if you're collaborating, of course. I do recommend things like Calendly if you are going to be having people booking times, you know, going back and forth To try and find a good time to meet is a huge pain. It's a real waste of time. Calendly does that for you. So it's a good tool to use. There's other examples of that as well, but that's a good one there. Emails can be really, really dumb. Slack is a lot of times a lot better, or Microsoft Teams. A good way to sort of cut back on the wasted communication back and forth. So you just want to identify inefficiencies and sort of continually address them while also continually going through and being, good about your priorities and good about your time management in terms of creating blocks and sliding things into the appropriate places. That is the short version of that. I hope that was helpful. Okay, I'll take a few more questions here. So another question I have here, where can I access the recording from part 1 and the recording of part 2? So we're going to be sending out this recording again in the email to all registrants in the next week or so, once it's done, processing and that sort of a thing. So we will put this link in that email, and we'll put the recording link of the previous one as well in this email. So don't worry. And then of course you can share that with whoever you like. Okay, I'll take a couple more questions here. See a few more rolling in. So let me just wait here. Feel free to go ahead and submit them before we close out for today. Alternatively, if you are not submitting a question, please feel free to go ahead and say in the chat what you thought of this, or what other challenges you have, or anything along those lines. Please go ahead and just say what you thought of this webinar, or what challenges you have generally with, getting change to happen, that sort of thing, even if it's not a question. So I got another question here though. So I'd like to know if I should evaluate the performance after each task. Well, it depends. And so what I recommend is this. For one-off tasks, no, typically no. If it's something you're only ever going to do once, it's actually usually going to be a waste of your time to go through and actually go, evaluating the performance of that thing, because you're never going to do it again, and that evaluation is not really going to help you, right? Now, if it's a repetitive task, if it's something that you do, every week, every day, every month, then yeah, I recommend that you do evaluate that performance. What I would say in that case is, you want to look at the efficiency. So how long did it take to get done? Look at how long did it take to get done over time, or is it getting slower or faster? Look at, if it's taking too long, or at least you think it is, take a look at what's the thing that takes so long in that task, right? So are you waiting for something? Are you having to do something manual, etc.? Oftentimes, again, if it's repetitive, you have the benefit of being able to automate it, or to make certain elements of it a lot more efficient, right? So removing manual tasks, removing things that are going back and forth, removing waiting periods, whatever it might be, you can evaluate and make those things better, right? So it's more about evaluating the process than the person, right? You do want to, of course, maybe consider the person as well, but people have good days and bad days, right? That's normal. So I'm big on the, don't be super hard on people, right? That's not a good management technique. Just hire good people and trust them. And then, if you didn't hire good people, then maybe reevaluate your hiring process. And then, at that point, of course, you want to evaluate the general or everything of how a process is going, continue to make it better. But that's what I would recommend there. Hope this has been good for you. This has been fun to produce. I just kind of think about something that I think about a lot and deal with a lot. So I've got a lot of these questions. So again, I was hoping this is really helpful for you. Let me know what you thought about this. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, it was too heavy on certain things, too light on certain things. I always try to improve these sorts of webinars. We typically do 1 or 2 per quarter of these ones. We do a monthly webinar every month. And again, we always try and improve it. So do let me know.